So we're filming this week's Inside the Lords. Inside the Lords, a bit of a novelty. We're not entirely sure if we should be, but we're here anyway. It's been a very serious week in world politics, and in some ways being inside the Lords has felt like something of a bubble because I've been following through the Building Safety Bill. So as I felt very strongly that, we were on the brink of World War III, I was making a speech on the importance of balconies and not being over risk averse, and it just felt so unlikely. But somebody said to me, and this is true, that in some ways we have to carry on, and there is no point me having argued throughout the COVID crisis and pandemic period and lockdowns and so on that we wanted to return to normal, and then suddenly some other crisis occurs and we don't have normal. So in some ways I was proud to be associated with the leaseholders who lobbied me absolutely correctly to say that there's a danger that risk aversion and an obsession with safety is so dominating the Building Safety Bill post Grenville that actually their homes are being treated as though they're fireballs, and lots of extra work that's not needed is being done on them, and they're going to end up paying a fortune and being worse off. So in some ways I was doing a good job there. There has been, of course, attempts, and I mentioned this last week and it's carried on, to, I think, opportunistically use the Ukraine situation to push through certain pieces of legislation where it's not appropriate. So at the moment we're going through the report stage, the final stage of the Nationality and Borders Bill, and inevitably all the opposition benches have wanted to say, we told you that we should treat everyone as refugees. Now you can see what it's like because of Ukraine. We have to pass certain parts of the legislation, and they've tried to use it to put the Conservative front bench on the back foot. And I have to say that that's been distasteful, because whatever one thinks about people turning from boats and whether they are genuine refugees or not, the reality is that the government have an obligation to try and take control of the borders, and to then opportunistically hijack the issue of Ukraine to try and artificially win anti-democratic votes against the wishes of what the public want, I think is a complete distortion of what the House of Lords should do, even though I think that in a way the very nature of it means that it can do it. Just to say, the generosity of people who've said, look, we've got to be as open as we can be to allow people from Ukraine to come here, is a very positive sentiment which should be endorsed. It is also the case that when we can see that there's a genuine refugee crisis, because the term refugee has been used so promiscuously to describe anyone and everyone arriving, that sometimes we've lacked that generosity when we're talking about real refugees fleeing war from non-Ukraine countries, from Syria or somewhere else. But you can see why, because there's a lack of honesty in this debate, and so I think calls for honesty are important, and not hijacking issues, standing on the moral high ground, is something that we should be aware of and wary of. There was a debate on actually the way that people were sent to the House of Lords that I decided it was a bit of an odd discussion on who is nominated for peerages. I'm obviously one of the more controversial people, and I made a speech on that very topic. But the main thing to note about it was that in some ways there is a panic at the House of Lords that people don't trust the House of Lords, and it's an illegitimate place, that cash for honours is a problem, that rewarding people in a crony-like way through the House of Lords or through the honours system, and we've all got Gavin Williamson in our mind who's just been knighted, and people just go, what, after he made a mess of education, that's the reward? That there is a kind of discrediting aspect, and I think that some of the debates about the reform of the House of Lords take the form of how can we reform it so that it becomes legitimate. And I think that they missed the point, which is that its lack of legitimacy is not because of any particular type of corruption or cronyism, but because it hasn't got democratic legitimacy. And that was one of the points that I was trying to make. But it's also the case that I raised the issue of the way that the understandable hostility to Russia because of its egregious egregious, barbaric assault on the people of Ukraine, on national sovereignty, on their absolute brutality in the midst of this war, is being used for a wide range of political issues that have got no relevance to it. And one of the things that I can tell you now is all over my social media feed are people who were hardcore Remainers who say that Brexit was a Russian plot, keep saying that I'm in the House of Lords because of Russian money, because Putin paid for Brexit, etc., etc. And that, again, degrades politics, and I wanted to make that point, and I did in the debate. But it's something to look out for, because the kind of use of Russia as a kind of all-evil word now can also lead to a really unpleasant jingoism. I don't know if you saw, but I'd recommend you read the article by Ella Whelan on this very issue, because it's really important that we don't go along with the Tom Tugendhats of this world and the people who are saying kick all Russians out, that we don't end up with a situation where Dostoevsky and the great arts of Russian literature are cancelled, where we don't have a knee-jerk reaction that anyone who's Russian must be on the wrong side. That we also don't have a situation where we almost adopt the slogan of Black Lives Matter, which is silence is violence, and demand that anyone who's Russian has to publicly denounce Putin in order to pass some moral purity test. So I think there's a lot of challenges. So to finish off, inside the Lords, seeing a bit of action. There's people in the main lobby here being shown around. I'll be back next week, where I'll be there. I'll be able to be in the chamber for the final day of the Nationality and Borders Bill. I'm going to try and make some points that I think are important. There's also a rerun of a debate that was cancelled because of the Ukraine crisis on online trust in the online world. And I think if ever I've wanted to be absolutely committed to free speech, it's when I look at the consequences in Russia of allowing them to use something like misinformation, which is what Putin actually says, to ban alternative opinions, to close down media stations. And we should absolutely resolutely stick with the Enlightenment principles of tolerance and free speech. And so I will be arguing that. But it's dark times. I can't get rid of that notion. I mean, it's a very important juncture. I think some of the discombobulation that we've all felt in the lockdown period, and a lot of the political trends that we've talked about over the last few years, suddenly you see come to the fore by this shocking turn of events. And I want us to be calm, reflective, but also recognise that this is not something that's just going to go away. So in that spirit, the Academy of Ideas has, in its newsletter, which I hope you'll sign up for, has recommended that we take a step back, watch some films. I don't mean watch some information films. We've done a recommended reading list, some recommended podcasts and so on, just so that we can all get to grips with what's going on. So I hope you'll take that on board. And then we've got a very important meeting in which we're going to have quite a serious reflection on the times that we live on, not just on the Ukraine-Russia question, but actually what it really means for changing geopolitical norms. A real coming to terms with actually the whole post-Cold War period and what this means for us. So I hope that you'll be able to physically come along and attend that meeting, and I will be advertising it. There's been a variety of debates on Ukraine in the House of Lords, and I didn't speak, and you might wonder why. And it's because, to me, making a kind of 30-second statement, jumping up and kind of doing a 2-minute speech, it just felt like it was the worst kind of virtue signalling or gesture politics. I want to be more serious than that, and I hope you forgive me for not just kind of jumping on the bandwagon so that I could have a clip on social media saying something interesting on Ukraine. I think all of us have got to realise that we have to have a bit of intellectual modesty, a little bit of humility, and try and understand exactly what's going on without being reactive and knee-jerk. So I'll see you next week, and I hope and use secular prayers to hope that the consequences for the people of Ukraine are not too terrible, but as we speak, they're not great. And I would welcome anybody from Ukraine who wants to come to the UK, and we all should.